Before his death, Deborah Kerr reveals shocking truth about Burt Lancaster. Deborah Kerr was born Deborah Jane Trimmer on September 30th, 1921 in Helensburgh, Scotland. Kerr carried with her a refined grace that was never artificial. It was a grace rooted in discipline, resilience, and a deep respect for her craft, qualities that would guide her through a remarkable career spanning more than 5 decades in film, theater, and television. Kerr's early life shaped her artistry profoundly. After her father, a British Army officer, died from wartime injuries, she was raised primarily by her mother, who encouraged structure and education. Deborah trained in Tensavellian ballet at Sadler's Wells Ballet School, an experience that instilled in her an extraordinary sense of posture, movement, and control. Although a leg injury ended her aspirations of becoming a professional dancer, the discipline of ballet became the foundation of her screen presence. Every gesture measured, every movement purposeful. This physical refinement would later distinguish her performances, giving her a quiet authority and elegance that set her apart from her contemporaries. Her acting career began in British cinema during the early 1940s, but it was her transition to Hollywood that elevated her to international stardom. Unlike many actresses who were molded into narrow stereotypes, Kerr resisted confinement. She possessed a rare ability to combine dignity with vulnerability, intelligence with warmth, and restraint with emotional power. Audiences quickly recognized that beneath her poised exterior lay a performer capable of immense emotional complexity. Deborah Kerr became especially renowned for portraying strong, morally conflicted women, characters who face emotional crossroads with courage rather than melodrama. One of her most iconic performances cameoing from Here to Eternity, 1953, where she played Karen Holmes, a military officer's wife trapped between duty and desire. The famous beach scene with Burt Lancaster became one of the most enduring images in film history, not because of its sensuality alone, but because Kerr infused a moment with emotional honesty and longing. It was a turning point in her career, proving she could transcend the prim and proper image often associated with her earlier roles. Throughout the 1950s, Kerr delivered a remarkable series of performances that showcased her versatility. In The King and I, 1956, she portrayed Anna Leon Owens with intelligence, wit, and quiet defiance, holding her own opposite Yui Briner's commanding presence. Though her singing voice was dubbed, her emotional performance was unmistakably her own, earning her one of 6 Academy Award nominations. In Heaven Knows, Mr. Allison, 1957, she demonstrated remarkable subtlety as a nun struggling with faith, fear, and unspoken love, revealing how powerfully she could communicate inner conflict without grand gestures. Perhaps one of Kerr's greatest strengths was her ability to portray women of conscience, characters whose strength came not from aggression, but from moral clarity and emotional integrity. Films such as Black Narcissus, 1947, The Innocents, 1961, and Separate Tables, 1958, allowed her to explore psychological depth, repression, desire, and loneliness with extraordinary sensitivity. And The Innocents, her performance as a governess descending into ambiguity and terror, remains one of the most haunting in cinematic history, proving her mastery of psychological drama. Despite being nominated 6 times for an Academy Award for Best Actress, Deborah Kerr never won competitively, an omission often cited as one of the Academy's greatest oversights. Yet in 1994, she was awarded an honorary Academy Award in recognition of her extraordinary body of work and lasting influence. In her acceptance, she spoke with humility and warmth, embodying the same dignity that defined her career. Deborah Kerr's personal life, much like her luminous screen career, unfolded with moments of offerments, devotion, strain, and quiet resilience. Her first marriage began in the hopeful aftermath of World War II when she was Squadron Leader Anthony Bartley of the Royal Air Force on the 29th of November 1945. At the time, Kerr was a rising young actress already attracting attention for her poise, intelligence, and extraordinary screen presence. Bartley, a decorated wartime pilot, initially appeared to offer stability and grounding that might balance the increasingly demanding life of a film star. Together, they built a family and welcomed 2 daughters, Melanie Jane, born on the 27th of December, 1947, and Francesca, and born on the 18th of December, 1951. Motherhood was a role Kerr cherished deeply. even as the pressures of her career pulled her across continents and sound stages. Melanie grew up to become a respected medical sociologist and later a retired academic, reflecting her mother's own intellectual curiosity and sense of discipline. Francesca followed a more artistic path, eventually marrying the distinguished actor John Shrapnel. Through Francesca, Deborah Kerr became a proud grandmother of 3 grandsons, Lex Shrapnel and Tom Shrapnel, both of whom would go on to establish successful acting careers, and Joe Shrapnel, who made his mark as orator. In this way, Kerr's creative legacy quietly extended into the next generation, not only through her films, but also through her family. Yet, despite these outward signs of domestic happiness, Kerr's marriage to Bartley was increasingly strained. As her fame and financial success soared, so too did the pressures on their relationship. Bartley reportedly struggled with envy and resentment toward his wife's international stardom, a success that eclipsed his own achievements and altered the balance of their marriage. Compounding these tensions was the relentless nature of Kerr's career, which frequently took her far from home for long periods. The emotional distance created by constant travel, coupled with professional jealousy, gradually eroded the foundation of their relationship. After years of difficulty, the marriage came to an end in 1959, marking a painful but necessary turning point in Kerr's personal life. A new chapter began the following year, when Deborah Kerr married author and screenwriter Peter Verrill on 23 RD, July 1960. Vertel, a cultivated and cosmopolitan figure, moved comfortably within literary and artistic circles, and their union offered Kerr a partnership rooted more firmly in shared creative understanding. Through this marriage, she became stepmother to Vertell's daughter, Christine Vartel. Embracing the role with the same quiet grace, she brought told aspects of her private life. Kerr and Vell lived an international existence, dividing their time between clusters, Switzerland and Marba, Spain, places that reflected the desire for privacy and tranquility away from the glare of Hollywood. These years were marked by relative serenity, intellectual companionship, and archery from the relentless pace that had defined much of Kerr's earlier life. However, as she grew older and her health began to decline, Kerr made the deeply personal decision to return to Britain so she could be closer to her own children. It was a choice that underscored her enduring devotion to family, even after a lifetime spent in the public eye. In the golden age of Hollywood, few screen partnerships burned as brightly or as dangerously as the one shared by Deborah Kerr and Burt Lancaster. To audiences, their chemistry appeared effortless, magnetic, and deeply romantic. Yet, behind the carefully lit sets and polished studio publicity, Kerr would later reveal that working with Lancaster was far more complex than fans ever imagined. In rare candid reflections late in her life, she pulled back the curtain on the man who so often stood opposite her, exposing a truth that startled even longtime admirers. Deborah Kerr never denied Lancaster's extraordinary presence. Burt was impossible to ignore. She once said he had a force about him that filled the room before he ever spoke. On screen, that force translated into performances that crackled with tension and passion, particularly in From Here to Eternity, where their forbidden love storyline became one of cinema's most unforgettable moments. But Kerr insisted that the intensity audiences adored did not switch off when the camera stopped rolling. He lived at full volume, she revealed. There was no half measure with Burt emotionally, physically, or creatively. While that approach thrilled directors and captivated co-stars, it also made Lancaster a demanding presence. Kerr admitted that she sometimes felt overwhelmed by his relentless energy, describing him as a man who pushed every boundary simply because he could. What shocked listeners most was her admission that Lancaster's confidence bordered on recklessness. Burt believed rules were for other people, she said bluntly. He didn't think he was being difficult. He thought he was being honest. That honesty, Kerr explained, could be brutal. Lancaster challenged directors, argued with producers, and questioned scripts openly. Even when such behavior risked his career, T.O. Kerr, this defiance was both admirable and unsettling. She also addressed the long-standing rumors about their off-screen relationship, which studios had alternately fueled and denied. Kerr was firm in her clarification. People wanted us to be what we played, she said, but the truth was far more restrained. While she acknowledged a deep emotional connection and mutual respect, she dismissed the idea of a secret affair. There was attraction, yes, but attraction does not always mean indulgence. Perhaps the most startling revelation was Kerr's reflection on Lancaster's inner turmoil. To the public, he appeared fearless and invincible, yet Kerr saw something far more fragile beneath the bravado. Burt carried anger with him, she confessed. Not cruelty, anger at limitation, at being told no with the idea that life might not bend to his will. She believed this internal struggle fueled his greatest performances, but also exacted a heavy personal toll. Kerr spoke with particular poignancy about Lancaster's later years when his physical strength began to fail him. That was the cruelest irony, she said softly. A man who trusted his body above all else had to watch it betray him. She suggested that this loss was harder for Lancaster than any professional setback, stripping him of the very identity that had defined him. Yet Kerr's revelations were not intended as condemnation. On the contrary, her final words about Lancaster were filled with admiration and sorrow. He was not easy, she said, but greatness rarely is. She credited him with raising her own standards as an actress, forcing her to meet his intensity rather than retreat from it. Burt made you braver whether you wanted to be or not. In the end, Deborah Kerr's shocking truth was not scandalous in the tabloid sense. It was human. Burt Lancaster, she revealed, was neither saint nor monster, but a fiercely driven man whose brilliance was inseparable from his flaws. I would work with him again without hesitation, she concluded, because even when he frightened you, he never bored you, and that in our world was everything. Through Kerr's measured honesty, Lancaster emerges not as a myth, but as a man, complex, volatile, and unforgettable, forever etched into Hollywood history, just as he was etched into her memory. Deborah Kerr passed away at the age of 86 on the 16th of October, 2007, marking the quiet close of a life that had been lived largely in the public eye, yet guarded with great personal dignity. Her death occurred at her home in Boatstale, a peaceful village in the county of Suffolk, England, a setting that reflected the serenity and privacy she had increasingly sought in her later years. After decades spent on sound stages, film sets, and red carpets across Hollywood and Europe, Kerr spent her final chapter far from the spotlight, surrounded by the calm of the English countryside she loved. The cause of her death was complications arising from Parkinson's disease, a progressive neurological condition that had gradually limited her physical abilities in the years before her passing. As with many individuals affected by Parkinson's, the illness advanced slowly, altering daily life and requiring increasing care. Yet Kerr faced it with the same quiet strength and composure that had defined her screen persona and her personal life. Although she remained largely private about her condition, those close to her noted her resilience and determination to maintain grace and independence for as long as possible. In her final years, Kerr had largely withdrawn from public appearances, though she continued to be celebrated and revered by film historians, fellow actors, and admirers around the world. Her illness did not diminish the respect she commanded within the film community. Instead, it underscored the contrast between the luminous vitality she had brought to the screen and the vulnerability she faced with dignity in her later life. Even as Parkinson's took its toll, her legacy as one of cinema's most refined and emotionally nuanced actresses remained firmly intact.